Great. Thank you, everybody, for being so patient. We are going to get started. I'm going to introduce, this is Justine Kucha. I'm Tammy Meltzer. I'm chair of the Battery Park City Committee meeting, and this is the Battery Park City Committee meeting of Community Board 1. To my left is Justine Kucha, who's my co-chair. That's Lucian Reynolds, our district manager for CB1, wandering around. Dr. Betty Kay, one of our members. We have a fantastic new intern with us tonight, Helen Burris. So
hi, Helen.
She's going to be taking notes tonight. Be kind to her.
Oh,
this
yay,
is her
thank
first
you.
meeting.
Clearly.
Whoa. Audrey is one of our public members, and Kathy Gupta is a member of our committee as well. We are waiting on Jeff Myhawk, who is on his way, and two of our other members are unable to join us due to work commitments tonight. We're going to go through the agenda. We're going to go a little slow because we need Jeff to be here to vote for the Homeowners Coalition, but Bob Zach is here. We're going to start by saying, as always, at a Community Board 1 meeting, we run by Robert's rules. So everybody on the committee asks questions after the presentation first, and then everybody in the audience will be recognized. If you have a question, please raise your hand. If you want to repeat what someone else has said, you could just say, I totally agree with that person, to save some time so we all go home. If you have any arguments that are new or old, Jeff, this is Jeff. Welcome.
Hello, Jeff.
Feel free. First conversation was Bob Zach presented last month at the committee meeting about the concerns for the Homeowners Coalition in terms of the budget from the Battery Park City Authority, the revenues collected, and how all of that works. So they asked us on Community Board 1 to work with them for a resolution to have an official statement regarding the needs of the condo owners in Battery Park City. We have extra copies of this that we can share, so anybody who needs them.
There's some in the audience that people might want to spread around, but
Are they passing around? Do you have any more? I'm looking for Jeff.
Okay. So we're going to start with this. Bob, do you want to give a quick general summary for the conversations we had last month directly? And you can either do it from your seat or from the mic, whichever you feel louder at.
Well, Tammy, I thank you very much. I've never been accused of being quiet, so it's okay. Soft-spoken. I just want to first of all thank you for allowing me to make the presentation at the last meeting from the Battery Park City Homeowners Coalition. On behalf of them, we are continuing our negotiations with the Battery Park City Authority to try to renegotiate the terms of the ground leases for our buildings. As all of you know, all of the buildings in Battery Park City are constructed on land subject to ground leases from the authority. That includes the commercial buildings as well as the rental buildings and the condominiums. And there are 18 condominiums that are part of our coalition. We basically ascertained some years ago that the terms of the ground leases were prohibitively risky to residents in those buildings because of the escalation provisions, if you will, for the ground rent. And in 2011, the original 11 buildings were able to essentially negotiate with the authority to freeze the amount of ground rent increases at a certain level for each building over a period of time that expires between 2039 and 2041. The terms of the leases do provide for additional ground rent payments, but not at the original schedule that the authority had put in those leases. All of these leases were negotiated by developers whose primary purpose was to build the buildings, sell the units, and if you'll pardon my French, get the hell out of Dodge. They got their money and they left us. And these are not particularly well-crafted leases. They make sense for commercial buildings, but not for residential buildings. And we've had very good discussions back and forth with representatives from the BPCA, and we're trying to continue those discussions, but we've frankly come to a stalemate. We have 6 buildings that were never part of the original 11 that settled with the authority in 2011. And succinctly, what is happening is, as we approach the termination of the ground leases in 2069, the value of our buildings goes down dramatically. And that means, of course, that the value of each unit owner apartment also goes down drastically, because essentially, under a ground lease, as you get close to the expiration date, the owner is able to recoup the building from you at the end of the lease, throw all the residents out on the street, tear down the building if they want to, and build something else. Now, I don't believe that that's what the authority intends to do. But nonetheless, that's what banks and third parties look at this structure and say. You cannot get a 30-year mortgage in some buildings right now because 2069 is approaching pretty fast. People cannot refinance mortgages. And it's only going to get worse as time goes on. So we have come to the Community Board, Battery Park City Committee, with the fervent hope that you will support us in our efforts to come to a fair and reasonable renegotiated lease term for all of the 18 condominiums. And frankly, this will probably serve as a model for the rental buildings as well. They're doing their own negotiations with the authority. We certainly recognize that the authority needs to have a stream of revenue to support the efforts that they make on behalf of Battery Park City, and that's going to continue. A very significant thing that we have asked, very honestly, is to extend the leases for 99 years past the termination date. And mainly because we'd like to continue to have Battery Park City Authority responsible for the oversight, maintenance, and upkeep of Battery Park City. I think they do a great job. So, that is why we are here. We're asking for your support in helping us achieve those goals with Battery Park City Authority, not just on behalf of the condominiums here, but really it's on behalf of the entire neighborhood, to make sure that we still have a viable residential neighborhood that's reasonably affordable. We would not be able to afford the costs of maintaining our apartments under the terms of these ground leases if they continue to operate. I think I mentioned at our last meeting my calculation, which I did based on, and I'm not a math person, that the common charges for my apartment in 2069 would be $181,000 a month. Now, I'm not part of that august group of billionaires running for president right now, but I assure you I would not be able to afford that. My math may be a little off, but that is the magnitude of the types of increases that the formula in the ground leases provides. So, that is why we are here. We are very grateful for your time. We are very grateful for your support. And I especially want to thank the board, thank Tim, Steve, others who have been a great help to us in our efforts.
So thank you very much for the presentation. We also, at last month's meeting, went over a brief financial summary report from the Battery Park City Authority, which I assume they'll go into finite granite detail when they do their next community meeting. But it was a very good general overview, which also then tagged the understanding that we know that they are running roughly 195 to 225. It goes as low as 170, a little bit higher some other years, for extra, that's $1 million of surplus that they have that goes to the city. There is a combination of there that is taxes, but also ground rent and things like that. So the conversation has been had at this committee numerous times by both renters seeking to ensure long-term affordability, but also from the community board and the community seeking to confirm long-term sustainability and affordability for community in the neighborhood. So we've talked about and had an assurance from the authority that there'd be no more condo conversions currently, which is good because it does help to stabilize the housing stock. There are other conversations that we need to have with them because of recent potential changes. But we're going to look today to support the Homeowners Coalition to the best that we can, because the goal to keep the community sustainable is more than just the housing stock. That leads to the schools, it leads to the gardens, it leads to the supermarkets. If the entire neighborhood turned into foreign ownership, I mean, there'd be nobody at the schools, there'd be nobody to support the markets, the small businesses. It's a cascading effect. So that's the position we have had on the community board for a long while, for all of Lower Manhattan. Even though Battery Park City is operated by the authority, because they own the land, that does not mean that the parameters that we seek are any different than they are for the rest of Lower Manhattan. We did a draft resolution based on the conversations last time. I'm going to read, all of the details out. It's kind of long, but it gets to where we're going, and I want to make sure that we did this based on conversations from last month's meeting, so you can refresh your memories on it. If I'm missing, if we have anything to add or to change, it's for discussion. This was just to attempt to capture the gist of everything that we said.
So I have a question for you.
Yes.
What do you hope to get from sending this resolution?
We are, as always, a community board is advisory. So we hope, as an advisory, to support the Homeowners Coalition, to have the elected officials step up pressure to be able to support the subject matter. That is always the goal. Because without a little additional pressure and going out publicly and saying, yes, we support this, sometimes you're the only one standing there.
Right.
And it becomes a David and Goliath.
Because as you'll see when Tammy reads it,
I'm going.
No, not rushing you. When Tammy reads it, part of the deal is the Homeowners Coalition has been meeting with the Battery Park City Authority. I think it's accurate to say it for the past 2 years or so. And so far, no agreement has been reached. So we're trying to add our force behind it to say, hey, look, number one, agreement has to be reached. Time is of the essence, and elected officials help them get involved here and help push them to come to an agreement. And what I would love to do is get some transparency as to, with everything, whatever the negotiations are.
So then this is a document that you can use to take to the elected officials.
This will be sent.
For them to get on board.
To get on board, to understand what the issues are. I mean, I think it explains, I mean, I have to look and see
Let's
what
go
the
through
changes
it all,
you
and
made. but
then
yeah.
we'll see if there's other questions. All right, and as always, all the whereases are kind of like the background information and then what we ask. Whereas all residential and commercial buildings within the confines of the area that was established under the jurisdiction of the Battery Park City Authority exists through a ground lease conveyance that allowed a private developer to build a structure on land that was and continues under the ownership of the BPCA, and where all ground leases within Battery Park City will uniformly expire in 2069. And under the terms of these leases, the BPCA may repossess all condominium buildings, evict unit owners without compensation, and redevelop the properties. And whereas all ground leases, and whereas banks are hesitant to offer new 30-year mortgages or refinance existing mortgages in the face of such uncertainty, which complicates what should be a typical financial consideration for condominium owners, such as selling or refinancing their unit to age in place. And whereas the terms of the ground lease also call for appraisal dates, where ground rents that are previously escalated fixed percentage annual increases reset to escalate on the basis of 1, the greater of 6% of the fair market value of the land under the condominium without considering the value of the building, or 2, the base rent under the lease. And whereas in 2011, 11 of the then existing coalition members whose buildings were built starting in the 1980s were facing the impending first appraisal date under the retrospective ground leases, renegotiated to the terms of their lease to put off to 2039 through 2041, depending on the condominium, the imposition of the first appraisal date reset. A 12th condominium signed on to the terms of that settlement in 2012. And under that 2011 agreement, the 12 individual condominium buildings agreed to annual increases of 3%, with certain years calling for a larger percentage increase, in which total amounted to a smaller escalation overall than would have been imposed but for the agreement. Boy, this is long. Okay. Whereas condominium owners in Battery Park City are also required to pay pilot, payment in lieu of taxes, on their units. Pilot assessments are collected by the authority but are calculated by the City of New York. in the same manner as property taxes on condos within New York City, but outside of Battery Park City. And whereas the pilot collected annually has steadily increased since 2011, well outpacing all negotiated ground rent escalations, and the annual increases in pilot combined with the annual increases in ground rent have put onerous financial stress on the condominium owners in Battery Park City, creating an affordability crisis in Battery Park City for these homeowners. A new iteration of the Homeowners Coalition, herein after the Battery Park City Homeowners Coalition, has come together with an 18-member condominiums representing thousands of homeowners residing in Battery Park City to address the situation as it approaches a catastrophic point of no return. And the 18-member Homeowners Coalition has met with the BBC on numerous occasions in the past year to discuss a renegotiation of the ground lease, and to date, no agreement has been reached. And whereas the Battery Park City Homeowners Coalition, which represents thousands of homeowners, has respectfully requested that the Battery Park City Committee of Community Board 1 assist the efforts of the coalition to renegotiate the terms of the ground leases and respective members to seek the ability of the residents of those condos to be able to afford to keep in place. We need to change that, I'll tell you why in a second. The community supports the coalition's efforts to provide affordable housing in Battery Park City to maintain the viability of our neighborhood for its residents. Okay, that's all the background. Now, therefore be it resolved, the Battery Park City Committee of CB1 of New York supports the efforts of Homeowners Coalition to engage with the Battery Park City Authority in renegotiation terms of ground leases of the condos, an integral part of the community by seeking reasonable restructuring. And CB1 calls upon our elected officials in city and state to assist the coalition and the authority in achieving a timely and fair resolution of the important matter to avoid the economic threat that is posed by the current terms of the ground leases and the threat posed to homeownership and ultimately affordability and stability of Battery Park City as a community. Okay. The second to last whereas, we cannot renegotiate as a community board private deals. So that needs to change a little bit.
So wait, that the Battery Park City Committee assist the efforts of the Battery Park City, the Homeowners Coalition, to renegotiate the terms of the ground lease.
You can support,
We
but
can
not
support,
do
we
it.
can
We
support.
request the
They just say
BPC,
support.
oh, Community Board 1, yeah,
Change
yeah.
assist to support.
We
Assist,
that community board one, not assist the efforts, support.
support. Okay,
Support
that
the
makes
efforts,
sense.
okay.
Well,
That's
this
all.
is saying what the homeowners coalition requested
Asking
of
us to
you.
do,
Yes,
but,
they request us, but we, as a community
Can't do it.
board,
we have to
cannot assist in negotiations.
Right.
We can
support the
support
efforts.
the efforts
So that's what would be resolved,
the
that you
word.
would
of the
support them.
coalition
Okay, that's fair.
in their efforts.
Supports.
It's the same thing as the next whereas. Why don't you just cut the entire whereas and make it shorter?
No, because one is,
No,
because one is they're telling the Homeowners Coalition is asking us to do the help.
and then in the resolved, you say we will support them.
Why do we need to say that they're
The
telling us?
last
to
whereas, yeah, I
Why do we
mean,
need the backstory of why we're doing
Oh,
this?
because you know why? I actually am going to annoy everybody by asking that some stuff that's in here that I had written in, that was history, gets included, as she's saying no. The problem that I have with this is that we are all term limited out. In 8 years or less, we will not be sitting here on this board, no one will know what the heck is going on, and this is a record that explains it's not enough in here. I think the way that I read it, I know you took out a lot of history. I think preserving and memorializing the history, even if it's long and annoying and boring, because it
Can you have an appendix?
is important because the future board will need to know what the heck went on, and there's no place else to memorialize it.
so
Well,
what
the
did,
decision's made, that will memorialize it.
No, well, okay, I'm going beyond your point. Your point is, you're right, we can,
we need to
This is just
condense
giving
the last
backstory
two
of why we're writing a
whereas.
resolution. Most resolutions don't contain an origin story of the resolution.
Correct.
fair, that part doesn't bother me, as long as we take the information here and put it into the therefore be resolved, which it kind of is, I'm good with that.
It already is. The last whereas
Says we're
is,
supporting their efforts. Supports the coalition's efforts to
Yeah,
provide
okay.
affordable housing.
and which we already say that. I mean, obviously, the last whereas is not requested because we're going to pass this, ideally.
Right, so be resolved.
So you striking the last two whereases?
The last whereas, only the last one.
I'm
Yeah, not the
suggesting
supports
second
the,
to last one.
yeah, the second, the whereas, the
No,
Battery
she's
Park,
not saying yes to that one.
you're not saying,
One
no,
of the two of them needs to go.
Why can't they both go?
Because therefore be resolved captures both of the affordability and the
Larger ones,
request.
just the backstory of why we're writing a resolution. Most resolutions don't
Yeah,
contain the
that's-
backstory of why you're writing a resolution.
But
And it's
Justine's
not
saying we
self-evident
need a
why we're
I'm
writing
backstory.
going to be adding something else. This
Okay.
is, that's just fine. I'm
So-
happy to cave on
Alright.
this because it says it
Well,
here.
let's see what everybody else says along with.
I mean, I'm not saying I'm right, I'm just saying I'm proposing that's
Lucian?
excessive information.
I'm a brevity person, but again, I think Justine has a good point on the origin story. However, long resolutions are,
Often ignored.
yeah, I mean,
Ignored by
or
who?
harder to digest.
I have
So-
a larger concern when we're ready for that, which is, this is all about homeowners. What about renters?
We did that
We
already
did
with Gateway.
renters,
And we separated it out.
So, if the owner of my building gets a decrease of land rent, of land lease, shouldn't that be passed on to renters?
I think it should be.
Otherwise, why?
we did that
And if not,
conversation
why would
with
you
the
do
gate.
a lessening of ground leases on owned buildings, of ownership buildings, but not of renters buildings?
We did that, Jeff, when we talked about Gateway, we did about renters.
But did it include
rental
all buildings?
It did include all rental buildings, but I agree with you.
It
I think we need to be more
Did
involved.
include
All
language
rentals?
in there about all the rentals.
But very clear language, or sort of mainly Gateway,
can-
but
we
some other
can-
buildings too?
We can go and
We can
revisit
go
it,
back and look at it.
and I would love to revisit it. I think we're splitting
But
them up.
there's also no way for us to compel, say, my management company
The authority can.
to reduce rents.
Part of why I want to be at the table, okay, not as
That's a
community
whole
board
other-
one, but as
that's a whole other-
democracy for BPC, or
that's a-
somebody as a separate thing, is because these are the kind of things that I think are really important. And affordability, loopholes that need to
Alright,
be
let's
sewed
stick
up
to
are
this.
things
Okay.
like that.
Jeff,
Okay,
let's
sorry.
stick to this because this is where the homeowners coalition has approached us, specifically targeting with this. You want to do a separate resolution in general on that topic? I am fine to take a look. We'll pull the history of what we have because I know we have history on this because we've discussed this at length with the Battery Park City Authority. We can pull it for next meeting. All the resos that have stood before on that type of thing, and then take a look at where we can go from there.
Well, I would just say before we move on,
I'm not moving on. I need other people to comment on this.
before we move on from that topic, I would
Yeah.
just say, I don't know about splitting it. Now you're pitting owners against renters by
No.
splitting it.
No.
Rather than just having it all be of a piece, which is, if you're gonna decrease land leases, there are decreased land leases for everybody, you know?
I agree with you. I
So-
said that when we were having the Gateway conversation. I was overruled on that because they wanted to break it up into pieces. I think that at the end of the day, maybe there's,
Because that is the way that the Battery Park City Authority operates as well.
but I think that pieces of what need to be done with the authority, because they have the control and they're the ultimate landlord, is that they can sew up these loopholes. And these are
And
all
we-
important things to
We do need
remember.
to do one on the rental buildings because of the upcoming potential that the rental buildings
Are gonna go
are going to
co-op.
go co-op.
And we have to
which
protect them. That
then
could be
puts us in
maybe
the same
April.
position we were when the Battery Park City Authority assured us that there'd be no
We can and
buildings
have.
that would go condo.
Yeah.
And while they agreed to no conversions, the last answer, we need to go back now for the conversation, so no conversions means no conversions. Yeah, there's a building in the north that's attempting to go co-op.
Co-op, yes.
BJ said they can't.
No, no,
No.
they can,
No,
building
he
tried
did
to.
not,
yeah.
actually.
He said no
There-
more co-op, no
there's
more
the-
condos.
Then they can go co-op?
The verdict is out on that, actually. The Battery Park City Authority, as far as I'm aware, has not come officially on the record to deny the availability that they would be able to turn co-op. My understanding is that jury is still out. Is that correct?
Day,
A rental building going co-op.
for the most part, no, it depends on the rental building. I believe,
Most part.
no, I think for the most part, it's in the ground lease, I have to get back to you for sure. But
You need to get back to us because there is a building who has already filed for the Attorney General to go co-op.
the Attorney General has a review.
And so does the Battery Park City Authority.
I mean, it's not.
If it's an ownership change,
Tammy,
And keep it neat and
would
clean.
you use the microphone? This is,
It's not coming through, right?
it's hard to hear. Just hold the small square on the left.
small square on that. I personally prefer to be muted, but hey, can you guys?
No.
Try a little
Is
karaoke.
this?
Yes, much better.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, so let's see if anybody else from the committee has any feedback to go into this, or pro or con, we'll vote at the end. Kathy?
Nothing for me. I would go with the separating, including this in another resolution rather than trying to add it to this one.
Okay. Audrey?
I don't know. Aren't we all in this together?
Yeah.
We are, but there are different parameters and buckets that the Battery Park City has each of us in.
So we are, the Battery Park City owners, the co-op people, they're on their own. And the renters, then we will then there be on our own too? You know what I mean?
We're doing resolutions for each group as the way that the Battery Park City Authority has defined us.
Okay,
So they have defined the condo owners in one bucket,
okay.
and the rental buildings in another bucket, and the Gateway Plaza in a third bucket of the rentals, or 2A if you want to call it. So we have been addressing, in the past, we have a history of addressing them as the buckets as a way to get to a whole.
To me, just off the top of my head, that's divide and conquer.
No.
It's support all and making sure that you get each one in the same level of support as the other. Because we don't want to pit one against the other, neighbor against neighbor. What we wanted is across the board. And that's what we've said pretty much in every place. Same reasons, same things. And just to make sure that they understand that there's not a difference to us. Affordability, sustainability, and building of a community is the same, period. Our intern, Helen, anything? No. You do, Betty,
On this particular issue, right? I think.
on this only.
Okay. Betty, nothing? Or,
Yeah, no, I do when you're done.
I'm done. No, on this
No,
particular issue, I have
she's had her
nothing.
chance.
Yeah, I'm
It's
done
your
on this
turn.
issue, I'm done. I have other things to say.
No, I think you have to, the sense of clarity at all, separate the renters from the owners. Because you're dealing with an owner of the building as well as the renters for one group. With the other, you're just dealing with the owners of the units. It would be too confusing to try to compare them. However, what you could do is add a wherever that asks, because of the insistence to keep the community together, to have some sort of parity in treatment of the two groups, since both are necessary to the community. And you could put some kind of sweeping whereas in each of the two separate, to confirm that thought.
Which we didn't do in the first one, but we can maybe do a third, fifth, whatever, resolution that does it.
That's what's
No,
suggested.
I think that that's actually fair.
I think so, it
Fair
is.
to- Yeah,
Yeah, parity, I like that. Another resolution at some point. that
I
does
can
it.
make that as a whereas. We
Well,
can
no, I-
wordsmith that the parity that we seek for rental stability is looked at in the same manner that we look at it for ownership.
Okay.
You could make a therefore be resolved, saying therefore be resolved that we'll also revisit this issue for rentals in the
To
future.
support the whole community.
Yeah.
We're supporting the whole
Whole
community.
community, yeah. And making that the point is that these are all connected. These resolutions should be looked at as a group, not as a,
Well, because it should be owners, it should be residents as well as commercial.
that's what this is.
Yeah. Oh, the
Well, maybe
commercial,
that should be
the commercial
included.
has commercial has a very sweet deal. There are commercial buildings that have, if I remember correctly, something like $1 a year for.
And that's for us to have parity with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be nice.
I'm not gonna even touch the commercial.
Is my building one of those?
Yeah, I don't think
No,
so.
you're not.
Okay. Let's see if there's anybody else in the audience who had, the constituency who have questions.
The ground floors.
I have a few questions. One is, we just made mention in the beginning of this conversation about the excess revenues from the authority that go to New York City. Is that over and above the pilot?
Yes, there is a portion of the excess
Okay.
revenue, a portion of, let's call it 170 million
Yeah.
is the pilot, and then a portion is excess.
But we talk about that.
So we talk about that in the next
So let's not ask
resolution.
those questions.
That's fine, I just want to get the
Yeah,
background
there is
understanding.
extra money that is paid that will, each year, that the city uses in both a joint purpose fund and others. So, yes.
Okay.
I mean, Nick wants to clarify something.
Right, so the excess revenue has two components. It's not excess revenue plus pilot. It's the pilot and the ground rent combined equals the excess revenues.
So the authority's excess revenues over and above operating become,
Everything we
The
take in
pilot.
from ground rent and pilot, first thing we do each year is pay our debt service, so the service of the bonds that we issue for capital construction. And we do our operating budget,
Yeah.
which is the maintenance of our parks, programming, and then once left is excess revenue, that goes through to the city. The city
Okay.
then earmarks that for different purposes.
you call it excess revenue,
Yes.
but the city is determining what the pilot has to be. And you have to collect that throughout
We are
the year, so the
essentially- we
city
are
gets their
essentially a
pilot.
pass-through. This pilot is set by the city.
Right. So we can't one year say, there's not enough money for the pilot, sorry. You know what I'm saying? It's already
It connects so
preordained.
much more money than is required through ground rent that there's never been an issue thus far in the creation of Battery Park City that they have not been able to pay the pilot.
Absolutely, because they're collecting
Well,
enough to do it.
Yeah.
They're
So
collecting
to my
far
mind,
more.
it's not excess, it's an obligation that has to be.
There's an excess
paid.
above the obligation.
But we, guys, the next, let's talk
Okay,
about this
all
with the
right.
next one.
So let me just go back to this.
Yeah.
The homeowners association is asking for support, and they've been meeting for 2 years. I didn't realize that had been going on with such intensity, because for many meetings, we were hearing that first the authority's gonna do a deal with Gateway, and then they'll really pay attention to the homeowners. So, and it's okay, I mean, I misunderstood something along the way. What exactly are the homeowners asking for? Now, I know with Gateway, it was a super secret.
So,
That out.
it's the same thing with the homeowners. We cannot individually be involved with their individual negotiations, which are private, but
Which are
what
private.
which are private.
That's what I'm asking.
But what we can, the only thing that we see publicly is the total amount.
Okay.
Okay, so if you want to look at their public documents, they have all the information out there publicly, and a very smart real estate people can go back in and say how much all of that is and things like that, and what the escalations are, but that's not under our purview
I
from the
understand.
community board.
I understand.
So the only thing that we can talk about is basically what we know, and that is that the negotiations were really based more on commercial than they were on residential. And when you look at the escalations that they have and how it's figured out, it does not take into consideration, for example, as we know, the condition of the building. So if you're in one of the older buildings in Battery Park City, the quality of the building itself is declining and aging, as any asset does. And the more money that they have to put in through whatever means it is, whether it's through, what's the word I'm looking for? Assessments.
Yeah.
Does not actually go into how they look at the building. They're looking at the building at rent and value of land, which doesn't necessarily help the building and the condo owners as their assets are depreciating in value, and they're having to assess owners to do things to upgrade the building itself. And that's not even before we remotely get down the conversation of being a waterfront community and needing resiliency and protection from all of that.
So the one thing that we did hear tonight is that the homeowners association is asking for another 99 years on the lease, which the authority has kind of said they would be willing to do at some point, to extend it. And then to,
We need that in writing.
yeah, of course, and then to postpone the appraisal dates, postpone potential
I mean, if you'd like,
escalations.
I'd be happy to give you some broad brush.
I would love, I mean, in general, as a,
Maybe there should be a meeting for condominium living people with the homeowners, gets feedback from the homeowners association.
Well, that's why I'm here, basically on behalf of
This
the
isn't-
Battery Park City Homeowners Coalition. I wish I could tell you that there were concrete terms that we've agreed to. As Tammy said, we have asked that they remove from the ground leases the fair market value appraisal date calculations, which would bankrupt virtually every building. And that's what almost happened in 2011 with a number of the condominiums at that time. We've also asked that they not change the terms of the 2011-2012 settlement to keep those in effect, because those provide for ground rent increases until 2039, 2041, depending on the building when it signed the agreement. We've asked for a 99-year extension of the ground leases, and we've asked for the 6 buildings that have not been included in the original 12 settlement to be incorporated into a similar provision that would calculate our ground rent to the end of the 2069 term. There are a number of other things we've also explored with the Battery Park City Authority, the idea of ultimately being able to buy the land.
Give him the mic so it gets recorded.
I don't think that's on the table.
No, there was an article that came out in the news recently about the city's interest in buying Battery Park City simply for the extra revenue that it makes.
But the reality is, I mean, our focus
we
is
don't.
on those broad provisions of the lease payments.
But take it so it's recorded. If you're not heard, it's not recorded.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Recording?
Yeah. Just to make sure that it's all there, because this is important.
Okay. Well, as I said,
I know you're loud, I hear you fine, but I want to make sure it's recorded.
my mother used to tell me I was too loud. And so those are the basic terms that we're seeking. The maintenance of the existing 2011-2012 settlement for those buildings that participated in it, the elimination of the fair market value appraisal date calculations for all buildings, because after that after 2039, 2041, those fair market value appraisal dates kick back in, and so we have the same problem. And they'll kick in for some buildings, like River and Warren, next year. So it is a question of how your original ground lease was negotiated and how it was set up. As I said, the third prong of this was to extend the ground leases and to find a meaningful way to provide a reasonable return for the authority until 2069, payment structure that will work, that will not bankrupt the existing condominiums. That's all we're looking for.
So, Lucian, can we cut this a little bit tighter in the therefore be it resolved and basically say that we support the request for an extension of the 99-year ground lease for all buildings, considering we know that the Battery Park City Authority is not going away at this point. Maintenance of the 2011-12 settlement agreement and elimination of the fair market value appraisal system.
I mean, I think the committee can say they're supportive of those.
Of those goals.
Yeah.
Everybody in for that?
Yeah.
So it's tailored and specific? All
Yeah.
right,
So
if there are no other
anything-
questions,
Two.
Pat's got a
Pat's
question.
got a question.
You know, we discussed the 99-year lease. Back in October, this committee met, and the subject of the 99-year lease came up. And what we discussed was, this is enacted in New York State legislature. And we have a state senator and 2 assembly members here. We should go to them, ask them to move for a revision of that legislation to fix that problem. That's the most direct way that I can envision. It's a New York State law. New York State legislature amends New York State law. We have 3 New York State legislators. And Tammy, at that time, you said somebody from this committee would go start talking to those legislators about that. And I think we should probably bring that to them.
I think that we can use this as a base and do a letter from the chair to the electeds
Right.
with that request to ask Deborah Glick and Yulee New and Brian Kavanaugh to work with Governor Cuomo to get that done.
Because again, it's legislation that affects no other legislators.
Correct.
And
I'm sure the governor would be thrilled if we'd like him to own the land for another 99 years.
Well,
Yeah.
and those are all good points. I actually have requested meetings with all of these individuals, and I've spoken with members of the staffs of our state senator Kavanaugh and our 2 assembly members, as well as the governor's office. And I'm waiting to hear whether those dates will be set up to discuss this most immediate issue.
Maybe we stick that in there.
You know,
We kinda
honestly,
did
the authority,
with them.
I don't want to tip their hands, and Anthony will kick me possibly if I do, has suggested that it might be possible to extend the leases without the need for legislation, that they believe that's possible. We're exploring that. I don't want to hold them to that, but we've asked them to explain to us if that can be done. That would be ideal, because if we don't have to go to the legislature, but we're looking for our state elected officials to provide us support.
And I think that that should be included in the title
Yeah.
letter that goes with the resolution to the electeds.
That's-
Lucian?
Just a point of clarification. For therefore be resolved, where we're asking our state legislators to perform some action, is it altering the law that governs the Battery Park City Authority to simply extend the ground leases, or to change the method of operation of the authority to have portability being a guiding principle for its operation? Because if you're going to tinker with
The affordability language is already.
It's there.
in the
Yeah,
mission
nothing is
statement of
changing
Battery
it.
Park City
The mission
Authority.
statement,
Includes it.
sorry, the mission statement includes it.
Yeah.
And the question is to have the legislators work to do a 99-year extension. That, whether that be through the authority as is, and is not required for legislation, that's fine. If legislation is required, that's fine as well. We just, the goal is to get there, however that gets done. It doesn't make a difference to the people who live here, whether it's an act of Congress or legislature, whatever it is, or it's just done through the authority itself, which is the governing body, as long as, if for any reason it's sold, it's not immediately ended.
The 99-year lease issue arose at that October meeting because BJ said, we think we have a way to do this, but it's very convoluted. And in fact, Matt was pressing BJ to explain to me this. I can't explain it. And then we suggested, well, let's go with a more secure, more definite idea of amending the law by appealing to our state legislators. And everyone seemed to agree that that was a good idea to do. So
Well-
let's do it.
All right, so on that note, I think if there are no other questions, we'll call the question for the reso. Matt, do you really have a question?
Yes, go ahead, I want to hear it. And
Take the mic from Pat if you do. And you're the last question before we call it. I'm not so sure.
I'll limit this to 20 minutes.
You have
If the
two.
Battery Park City Authority can commit to broad, blue sky, long-term goals like going carbon-free by a date certain in the future, why can't you lean on the same policy levers to commit specifically and publicly to goals like amending these ground leases by date X, or achieving goals Y with Gateway and the other rental buildings by date Z? That would introduce transparency and accountability that just aren't there right now for renters and for homeowners. And in the absence of that, it allows the authority to, forgive me because I don't mean this judgmentally, but to delay endlessly, to prioritize other things, or to retroactively redefine success as whatever result ends up being produced at whatever date it happens to be produced. And I asked BJ at the last meeting,
Nick,
really,
you need a mic.
oh, sorry. Not too far off in the future is the date at which you people will be collecting $1 billion a year from everybody who lives here. And I said, is that too much? And he said, yes, that would be too much. Members of this committee have suggested that the amount you collect now is already too much. I'm guessing you don't agree because you're collecting it.
and more.
When will you commit to, this is the amount that we should collect and no more, and here's the mechanism that we've dreamt up to prevent us from collecting more and rolling the rest back into the community to preserve affordability? Because in the absence of any kind of, even those commitments wouldn't be binding, they'd be rhetorical, but they'd at least be specific. And in the absence of that, it sounds like this is kind of happy talk.
Okay.
Mike and then Nick, we're gonna move to vote, so
I
you're the last comment.
I can speak for a bit on what I can speak to. I don't want to, I can't speak specifically in negotiations, obviously. I just can't do it, I won't do it, and I'm not part of the negotiations.
I would add there, even without prejudice, without revealing anything about negotiations,
Right.
you could, I don't mean you personally, you
Right.
could at the stroke of a pen say, these are our goals, A, B, C, and D. If we achieve them, we have succeeded. If we don't, we have failed. If we get A and C but not B and D, then we get a passing grade. But nobody's done even that. Nobody has said publicly what you want to achieve at Gateway affordability. Nobody has said
I
publicly.
wouldn't say that. We've written
Publicly.
a number of letters to the editor in the fine local publication, the broadsheet, of which the editor-in-chief and the publisher are here, that Battery Park City Authority's goals are to preserve and, to the extent that we can, expand affordability in Battery Park City. We've spoken often about that, and I realize that until something is said, it's talk, but we have committed publicly to that. We just said the same thing. Our goal is not to get $1 billion. Our goal is to keep the neighborhood affordable and keep the community here. But beyond that, I mean, you kind of asked a lot, but the very short answer, I think, to why can we commit to try to be carbon neutral but not other things is, to my mind, I think, at least at the outset, a very simple answer, because we can commit as the authority to be better at the things that we do in terms of operating the physical plant and the things that we do through programming and operations and maintenance and horticulture. With negotiations, there's always additional parties at the table. It's not just us, so even if we said it, it would only be as good as what we say. It doesn't mean it's actually done until the other parties agree, whether it be the homeowners coalition or CRAC or anybody else with whom we may be negotiating.
I know what you're saying, but I want at least the information back, or at least in the record.
All right, so here's what we're gonna
Right.
go.
Oh, and the last thing was, really good. I forget what it was. Go ahead, I'll think about it.
Justine's gonna read her background information that she wanted to read into the record for the meeting, and then we're gonna vote on the resolution.
Okay, sorry to be a pain in the neck, but I think it's important to understand where it's all coming from, because lots of terms are thrown around that aren't explained. What I would add is to make it clear that it's the master lease, that's the major conveyance, but then whereas that have been taken out to make this shorter, say that, all right, let me just make sure I got it straight. That's not repetition. So each condominium, which we know, rental and commercial, building within 92 acres, has its own individual ground lease with the BPCA, which falls under the master ground lease. All of these ground leases will expire in 2069 under the terms of these leases, as well as the master ground lease. And we've said this, the BPCA is free to repossess. I just don't remember what you put in there or not.
It's in there.
Whereas banks and lending institutions are hesitant to do it. The terms of the master ground lease are also called for fixed appraisal dates, different for each building, upon which the ground rents charged to each building that were, prior to said respective appraisal dates, annually increasing at a fixed percentage rate, would automatically reset to a new increased baseline value, which would be the greater of either the 6% of fair market value of the land under the individual condominium, as if unencumbered, or the base rent under the land lease. That's what.
That's in there. It's in there.
It's in there, is it?
In there.
Yeah, that's there.
That's there.
Two.
All right. That's
Fourth whereas.
We're there.
All right, then I'm going to stand down. I didn't see it. I'm sorry.
All right.
Thank you.
Are we good to call the question?
Yes.
All right, all in favor?
Oh, yeah, I'm in favor, of course.
Sorry.
6 in favor.
Any opposed? Any recusals? Nope. Motion passes, thank you. And to the Homeowners Coalition, who has come for the last 6 months working with us on this, we appreciate the patience and the due diligence. Like everything else, it takes a village, and so thank you. All right, you're going to want to hear the next one.
Yes.
So, also at the last meeting, there was not enough time because we were very heavy on presentations. We talked at great length in the last couple of years about the settlement agreement. The settlement agreement is something that was done with the city and the state and the Battery Park City Authority, and it is a memo of understanding for what is to happen with the funds. For those who live here, we already know that. Maybe, if you come to any of the financial discussions with the authority. So the buckets from the slides that we've shown in the past are almost full for what needs to be fulfilled in the memo of understanding, which means there will be a renegotiation of what the extra monies are used for. All of those conversations did not include one resident when this was done in 2010, because there was not one resident anywhere in sight. So we now have 2 residents on the board. However, none of them have ever, one has come to a community board meeting in the last 2 years, I think one. One has never come to the community board.
Ever.
There has not been, other than mixed participation here, any dialogues with the community about finances and things like that. They hear through the board meetings what the concerns are. But even within this, there has never been a renter at all involved in decisions that are made. Whether you've been a renter for 10 years or 20 years or longer. There are people who have rented in this community for over 20 years, have no intentions of leaving unless they get pulled out of here. And they are as much an integral part of the stability of the community and sustainability as anyone else. So, with that thought, we have been asking and pursuing, when the next settlement agreement comes, we want more sunshine on that, because all of that money is looked at just like the city looks at the rest of everything else as, oh, look at all this extra money we can get from the lovely people who live here. So we would like to have a seat at the table. It's very simple. It's not that hard. So let's go. Whereas the Battery Park City Authority has administrative jurisdiction, and I'll just say over all of us. In 2019, BPC has gross revenue from sources including but not limited to ground rent, payment on land leases, pilot, which is payment in lieu of taxes, civic facility fees, and investment interest income was approximately $319 million. And whereas in fiscal year 2019, 35% of the receipts were allocated to operations, budgeted expenses, and debt service, while all of the remaining funds collected, 65%, was remitted to the city and divided between general fund and joint purpose fund. The joint purpose fund was established decades ago and amended in the 2010 settlement agreement between New York City, BPCA, and we have to say New York State because the New York State Controller was part of that.
Okay.
In broad terms, after the BPCA's operating expenses, and Nick, this is where you need to confirm we've got this right. In broad terms, after the BPCA's operating expenses and debt service had been proportionally deducted, monies collected by BPCA's pilot are allocated to the New York City General Fund, and monies collected by the BPCA from ground rents are allocated to the Joint Purpose Fund. Is that correct? Okay. The BPCA has no input of how the monies are used in the New York City General Fund are spent, actually, or the Joint Purpose Fund.
Well, they were part of the agreement, but okay, yeah, I guess they don't, once it's passed over, it's out of their hands.
Once the money leaves Battery Park City Authority, no one has say for anything.
Correct, that makes, yeah.
Whereas the BPCA, the mayor, and the controller, that's city and state controller, jointly determine how monies are allocated to the Joint Purpose Fund are spent consistent with the terms and conditions of the settlement agreement. And the settlement agreement was modified by the 2010 amendment, which called for allocation of $861 million to the Joint Purpose Fund to be divided in 4 buckets. We've got the 4 buckets listed.
You guys all
Whereas the 2010 amendment sunsets, not on a specific date, but when each of these requirements has been fulfilled. And to date, the first 3 buckets has been filled, and the 4th is likely to be filled by the end of 2021. Whereas there is no indication that any of the capital that was raised by BPCA for any of the buckets was invested back into Lower Manhattan, which is an urgent need for resiliency funding, and it has a dearth of its existing affordable housing with a near non-existent pipeline to create any new affordable units. And whereas time is fast approaching for the next amendment to the settlement agreement to determine future allocation of monies collected, we could just say collected.
Well, yeah.
For either fund?
For the joint purpose.
No, yes, she's asking for either fund.
For either fund.
No, but it's not.
It is.
The settlement agreement
It is.
doesn't know how much. I'm also thinking about that meaning what the purpose is of it.
Yeah, I would say because it's specific to that joint purpose fund.
It doesn't cover anything
Yeah,
else, so you need
the
to
general
make
fund
it
will always
specific.
be
The general fund.
filled.
And whereas the Lower Manhattan community, as represented by CV1, has never had a direct voice in decision-making as to regards to what the money in the Joint Purpose Fund is spent on, even though the funds are generated by ground rents paid by the stakeholders of Battery Park City. Now, therefore be it resolved, CB1, not Battery Park City Committee, of New York City believes that the unique circumstances of the generation of these specialty funds requires unique engagement and inclusion of Battery Park City residents, both renters and owners, as well as members of the Manhattan Community Board, into discussions for the next settlement agreement. And further be it resolved, the City of New York and State must take into account the total funds and timeline to fulfill the next agreement while still providing relief to the housing cost burdened stakeholders who are in need of financial relief to remain in their homes. So this dovetails back to every resolution that we talked about with affordability for both renters and owners. There's not a separation in this, it just says housing cost burden. Because if you are paying by rent more than 30% of your income, you are considered burdened. And the condo owners, we've just covered it, Mike. Okay, so let's open it up for questions from the board. We're going to start Justine.
Sorry. Of course, I have something to say. But this might be a good place to put in the parity language. Parity in treatment, and also maybe...
This is about the funds and getting representation.
Yeah, okay. All right, never mind. No, fine. I have
Pass the mic.
Anybody?
I have, yeah. So, where the be it resolves to be seen kind of vague, like what are we really asking for? So,
A seat at
We
the
want to see at
table.
the table.
I don't really read it that way.
Oh.
We're kind of saying that.
Requires unique
Believes the
engagement and
unique
inclusion.
circumstances
Inclusions of Battery Park City residents. I want to say how many, but I don't know.
and inclusion of that. Also, there should be a comma going on here.
There should be some kind of.
Where?
After residents, comma, both residents and welcome to Manhattan Community Board, 1, comma. I don't know, it just seems inclusion.
What do you suggest that you think would make it stronger?
Contingent of?
In the agreement, in the process, I don't know, it just says.
Chosen by the community?
Chosen
Chosen
by
by
Come
who?
back to me.
Okay.
Someone else.
Betty?
But to make that strong, I would agree.
Actually, I'm kind of confused by the whole thing. I have paid taxes my whole adult life. Never have I ever been allowed to discuss, I want that money from my taxes to go on my block. I want that money to go nowhere else in the state I live in, but I want it to go in my immediate neighborhood because they're needed. But it does.
No, this is on the bigger,
But it's bringing it to Lower Manhattan. The point is, they are allowing the resiliency and other things that are very specific to Battery Park City to protect the land.
No,
So
we're
it's
paying
something they're
the
doing now.
resiliency and the
But what
whole...
we're talking about is that the funds that are sent to the city, we would like to see them put to resiliency in the rest of Lower Manhattan as well. Why
But what
not?
about the Bronx? I mean, what about Queens
this
and
is
the
Community
Rockaways?
Board 1.
I can advocate for
All I'm
community
saying, I'm
board
going
one.
back to, I've never lived anywhere where my block got to dictate where our tax money went versus tax money from other parts of the city.
But don't you vote on the budget?
You expect.
Don't you vote on the budget? Don't we do budget needs? And don't we do budget requests
Yeah.
through the city, which is the
Right.
use of the funds? We do have a request system that we put in.
Right, that's already in place.
That has no effect whatsoever on the Battery Park City Authority or how the money is spent that is earned from Battery Park City, whereas this does.
So, I'm
I mean,
with you,
I
Betty.
don't
see
quite
what
get-
you're saying. I see what you're saying, it's fine.
I mean, part of the reason behind this is to give us some control over the amount, the city is never going to want, and the state and everybody else is never going to want to take less money from us. In that article about the,
But do I care if
I
the money
care.
goes to somebody else in Battery Park City?
I
Somebody
care
in Lower
because it's
Manhattan
more
versus
money that's
somebody-
come out of my pocket. That's why I care.
Maybe I
And
don't
if I can control away and put a cap on what's bleeding out of us by putting it back into us, whether it's to help the individual buildings or figure out ways to keep it more sustainable and affordable in Battery Park City.
I don't,
I don't know that that's what's going to come out of it.
but, and I don't think you can say it can only stay here.
No.
Because I think that,
In Lower Manhattan is what it's going to
well,
come to.
but what we're saying,
Seat at the table.
what we're saying is we want a seat at the table, because if the next agreement comes and there is another 861 million, but there's a deadline put in, for example, which we have no idea, then that puts an intense burden on. The way that the agreement's structured now, at least it's open-ended, so when they fill the buckets, they fill the buckets. But if we're asking for relief on one end, if you don't have a seat at the table, even if it's observatory, or at least to have some participation, you want to ensure that the next agreement is that same open-ended, so there's not saying, okay, in 2021, by 2030, you're going to get X number of revenues. And if you can't get X number of revenues, you know, you're going to have to change things. But you want to ensure that there is a consideration of an open-ended and not having them take a look and say, okay, well, you've got 195 million extra now. We take our 70 out, just argumentatively, for pilot. That gives us 125 million. We're going to count on that as your baseline revenue. And there's no one at the table saying, you know what, that might not be reasonable. In terms of the stakeholders, there's no one at the table, and the door is closed. All we're asking for is a seat at that table. Does that sound clearer?
Not really.
Okay.
I mean, you're going to have one person with no power, because if they're going to ignore the community board, they're going to ignore the one person on. But most negotiations are private. So to say that we want them to not be private, we want someone who represents us to go, who can tell us what's going on, is a conflict.
Why?
How so?
This is
Why?
taxation, and we should be
We should
represented.
be represented. It's
Just like
taxation.
any other taxpayer
This is, no, because we pay more than most taxpayers.
Yeah, this is
By having a
how
ground
this is
lease and a
counting the
pilot.
ground rent as well as the pilot. The pilot's assessed by the city. That's a whole other conversation, which we need to get involved in, but not tonight. But this is definitely affects us. We are paying
It's really
more.
talking about representation.
Yeah,
average.
and we haven't
Because
even.
we don't,
It's representation in the settlement agreement, not in taxation. That's
Correct.
why
Right.
it's
But the
different.
settlement
It's how
agreement
it's spent.
taxes us.
That's how it's different.
Pat,
Pretty
well,
kind
wait,
of
first,
tax.
anybody from the,
Board.
okay,
I
Pat?
want to make sure I
And then I'll
understand.
wait my turn.
Pilot is the property tax. No matter
Correct.
where you live in the city,
Yeah.
your property is going to pay for it. And
Microphone.
pilot pays for school teachers, sanitation, police, the regular municipal services, and that's what so
It's on.
pilot pays for that. And so our pilot goes to the city, and we have a city council member who can represent our interest in what piece of New York City taxes we get in our district.
This is not about the pilot, this is about the overage.
Overage of the pilot, and how much is that dollar? When you take the pilot out, because that's inescapable, that's your taxes.
175
Well,
million.
If just as a point of information, I think it's
25%.
it's commingled. The
Yeah.
pilot and the ground rent is commingled. So it's the excess of whatever the Battery Park City does not use in operating or debt service and some other small category. That's which is passed back to general and to the joint purpose fund. So the pilot is completely commingled with the other.
I make a separate, listen, every year I get a piece of paper from our managing agent. This was your share of the property taxes we paid this year, the pilot.
The pilot.
But we know what that dollar is, and the authority knows what that dollar is. So there it is, that's the dollar. This extra money.
It's 25%. I mean, in BJ's buckets that he presented and when he presented his presentation, he said approximately 75% of what's collected of that 319 million a year, approximately 75% is pilot and 25% is ground rent, is how I understood his buckets. Somebody else correct me if I'm wrong.
dollar value,
320 million at times, no, that's total. Times 25% of 320 million.
It's $80 million.
That's about
So here's
what
the
I
thing.
understood.
Why are we paying the $80 million? Why don't we just take that out of ground rents? And again, if it comes out of ground rents.
Because there's an agreement that that extra money goes to buckets in the city.
And that's what
And
we're
that's
talking
what we're
about.
saying. We'd
That's
like to have a
what's
seat at the
the
table
table.
to talk about the extra.
Say
If
that.
you amend the ground rents, there's not going to be the extra money.
Well, I think part of the deal is in amending the ground rents, there might be the extra money because they want it. So the city buys us, you think they're actually gonna say, oh, we'll let the ground rent go away? They're gonna say, we've been collecting $320 million a year from you all. We want 320 million times the next one.
No, we're down to.
Actually, the city already went on record saying that the way
Yeah.
that they would make money
Is
by
from
the
them.
purchase of Battery Park City is selling the land to developers.
I know that.
Oh,
So-
selling it from underneath
The
us.
parks, or the parks.
So
We'll
just
have
a
no more
point of
parks.
information really quick, I just wanted to verify that the signatories for the settlement agreement,
Yeah, thank
the
you.
comptroller, the mayor, and Battery Park City Authority. There's the
It's
three.
city,
Isn't it
it's,
city
no,
controller?
it's
No,
city
city.
controller. I didn't want to challenge you, but
Yeah,
yeah,
okay.
Solution did, so that's good.
So the issue here is how do we get out of this $80 million? And you get out of that by adjusting your ground rents. And again, an adjusted ground rent, you know, part of that stipulation is it has to be reflected in rents.
Operating.
Yeah, 100% has to be reflected in rents. That's part of the deal.
You know, rising tide, you know, floats all boats. If we can get rental building owners and condo buildings a better break on ground rents, it helps everybody.
It helps everybody, as long as there's that loophole is sewn up. Because I can recall back in 2002, when the city gave $500 back for people to encourage them to come here to rent. You get $500 off your rent. So every friggin' landlord in Battery Park City and Lower Manhattan increased their rent by $500.
What was that? Was an extra $5,000 over 2 years.
Oh, but it comes to $500 a month. But yeah, it was ridiculous. That's what they did, and that's not right. That benefit was supposed to be for the tenants, not for the landlords.
Next.
I'll just raise one point that changed. One point that changed for all of us in very recent years. Originally, that pilot that we are told we can deduct on our taxes.
Oh, yeah.
And that is now capped at 10,000. For some of us, we are paying more than double that amount in taxes between pilot and then our city and state income taxes. And we've lost the deductibility of all that. So I think that has to be considered when the table gathers around this
So
topic.
that's a larger tax issue that actually Debbie and I were talking about what committee on CB1 could take up the taxing and how taxation works with the SALT issues and looking to pass a resolution. It wouldn't be in Battery Park City because we pay taxes like everybody else. It would probably be in quality of life.
It would be, yeah.
And because that affects everybody.
Yeah, and it probably would be something that we could then combine with community goals too, of quality of life.
They have a specific housing focus, there's a subcommittee, so.
And by the way, I'm searching my phone just to find the last slide on the buckets, to see if I have it. All right, does anybody else in the audience have any other questions on this? Are we good to call a question for a vote?
Were there any amendments made?
So we can clear up, therefore be it resolved to be a little bit stronger and clearer.
Just on that one where it's really, where you say,
Would you pass that back to Michelle?
The resolved or the whereas?
oh yeah, the resolve.
Yeah, I can.
Hi, just on the word, this word says the fund requires unique engagement and inclusion. I think that if we could just be a little more specific about what that actually means.
Share it with you right
It's kind of, it's beautifully written, but it's a little wordy and just to make
Say it
sure.
again.
That's fine.
The first resolved
The first resolve.
on that second.
Unique circumstances of the generation of these specialty funds, which is fine, requires unique engagement and inclusion. That's what you were referring to, Jeffrey, right? That was a little, like, not,
What is that?
that's what he was talking about.
In the first therefore be it resolved, you want us to streamline it, basically that says include the people, period.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got
The
it.
second one's also kind of vague too, like what are you
Including,
asking for?
What would you like the period?
He basically wants the first one to be streamlined, to basically say to include Battery Park City residents, renters, owners, and members of Community 4.1 in the discussions for the next settlement agreement, period. And then the last one should say, the City of New York and Battery Park City Authority must take into account the total funds. What you need to take into account is the issues of the housing cost burden stakeholders who are in need and financial relief to remain in their homes
What does that mean?
when looking
What does that
at the
mean?
total funds and timeline for fulfillment. Basically.
I don't know what that means.
What that means is, don't bankrupt people who live here, don't put an end date. You can say,
Don't
you
put
know,
an end date.
open-ended.
Yeah, instead of timeline, say, oh, we want, take into, okay, so all that, take into account.
Are you saying you want money to have people who stay in their apartments?
I would love that, but no,
I
we're
mean,
saying.
we can't really ask for that.
No.
It's like,
No,
it's a
but what we
weird
can
ask.
say is that we want, you know, an open-ended, the next agreement would be open-ended as this one is.
Yeah, where you have that, Dan? We
Well,
say it above.
Joel providing relief to the housing
No sunset
cost
date. We'd
burdened
like no sunset
stakeholders
date.
who are in need of financial relief to remain in their homes.
So you basically want to say that.
It's kind of like you're vaguely saying you want money so people can stay in their homes. Like,
Well, we
can't
don't wanna
really
be
ask for
over-
that.
You wanna-
Overcharged, so therefore we can say.
We can say that it's
We don't wanna-
open-ended, we want to say we want to pursue lowering.
Why don't we talk about Patrick is saying?
Lucian.
Yeah, I think one of the ideas we're trying to capture was that the amount that goes, so you have a certain amount that goes to the general fund and a certain amount that goes into the joint fund, but the size of that joint fund maybe could be optimized to maybe require less contribution from renters and homeowners through ground rents. But it's a way of saying, look at how much you're asking for in total, because we talked about last meeting was, or the meeting before that was, what's the size of the pie? Because we were talking about the share of the pie, but the size of the pie is really it's balancing how much the authority needs to collect from the residents and businesses versus how much they have to bring to the city. So I think that's kind of a roundabout way of getting to that, which maybe could be more direct, but I think it was trying to hint at that.
So we're going to clean that up to be far more direct.
More direct.
More direct. All right.
More direct. Got it.
With those in mind, let's call the question. Nick,
So we have it, just want to make sure we.
hurry, because I called the question, so hurry.
No, I'm sorry.
It's a point of order.
I just want to make sure, yes, point of order for information, just so we have it all. It may make sense, and it could be fixed, I suppose, in post-production, that the Battery Park City Authority also doesn't have a choice about passing its excess revenue through to the city. That's by our constitution and in state legislation, part of our enabling legislation. So it's not like if we said, we just don't want to give you excess revenue, that is not something we could do.
We understand.
The other thing I would add, and this goes a little bit back to Matt's question earlier, as part of the answer, is when we bring up from time to time, and Tammy brought it up as well, this repurchase option that the city holds. For those who are not aware, the city of New York has the option to repurchase Battery Park City for $1 and an assumption of our debt, which is about $1 billion, which sounds like a lot of money, but for the city that holds many hundreds of billions of dollars of debt, it's not that much. That's not something we say just to be red herring. That's a legitimate thing that gets brought up now and again. There was an article in the Independent Budget Office put out that Matt very ably wrote up. It's something that the city kicks around from time to time. Now, I'm not speaking ill of the city. That's just, it's a business decision and a governing decision. But to the city's mind, and I say this because they've told us this, they don't view what we give them as excess revenue. They view everything as their money.
Yeah, I know.
They never fail to remind us, they say, you know, this is all our money. We let you keep some of it to do your operations and your programming, but it's really all our money. So the city can buy us back at some point, at which case, in the immediate term, it probably doesn't make a huge amount of difference, but what that means practically long-term is that there are no longer Battery Park City parks, they are New York City parks. There is no longer a dedicated staff that takes care of our parks and our grounds separately from the rest of the city. It just becomes the rest of New York City, which is wonderful. It's the greatest city in the world. But there is a difference in the level of service that we provide by Battery Park City. So there's a lot more, I think, a number of more players here than simply the community board, obviously, and the Battery Park City Authority. BJ brought it up last month as well, but I would encourage you all again for a kind of perhaps fuller conversation. It may be helpful for you all to have someone from the Department of Finance and the city come in kind of explain a little bit about real estate taxes and how they're constructed and how they're calculated and how it specifically affects Battery Park City particularly and Lower Manhattan overall. And then also someone perhaps from the mayor's office or from someone in the Housing and Economic Development end or OMB that can talk a little bit more about city budgeting. I wouldn't want to have folks who are otherwise uninitiated to believe that it's all within the control of the authority, because as we know, it's not. So, just so we're clear on that, I wanted to make sure that the committee had that to think on. The rest of this, I think, is it seems straightforward enough.
Okay,
So if that's helpful, and we can, if there's any edits, I can.
I think we call the question and move forward. Anybody in objection? Any second it?
I second your.
Fine. All right, let's roll.
In favor? In favor? It's not working.
So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Any abstentions? Refusals? All right.
Well, I do,
No,
I'll ask
you're
for
voting no,
opposition,
right? Or no?
I'm voting no. I agree with Nick. I think it's too rash a statement and doesn't balance the realities. It doesn't reflect the realities in any way.
So are you abstaining or opposing?
I'm opposing. I do not want New York City taking over Battery Park City. I said that the day I bought, and I
Well,
still
neither do
believe
I.
it. Well, but that's what you're pushing here. And
I don't
that's why I think Nick's right. There needs to be more information to balance, because I do think it's worded in a way that could offend some people in the city and threaten what we all say we don't want.
Yeah.
One last thing. What I just heard Nick say made no sense to me. There's a
Microphone?
lot of talk here, like, a lot of money and a lot of stuff. I understand.
Can you pass the
some of
mic
it,
to
but not
Bell
all of it,
instead?
Because I'm a retired school
Good?
Yep.
However,
No, it's there,
Nick
it's there.
said something that I really like. He said, why don't we have somebody come in
Oh, well, that's good too.
from one of the city departments and explain what really happens with the money. To me, that makes the most sense of all. Then you find something out. They're the professionals, we are not.
Okay.
I don't know what that means.
Does that
She's
hold
kind of
up?
going the way I am.
Okay.
So are you changing your vote?
No, I'm not taking that vote. I'm just.
You just want more information.
I
You want it
Do you-
ongoing.
I want what Nick said.
So the question is, do you want to table this and see to April, see if we can get somebody from the city to come?
That would be helpful.
Are we good for that?
Makes sense
It's
to
a
me.
motion, it's a motion to table that I'm making. It needs to be seconded and voted.
I'll second.
All right, so you got to vote on that. So that means that we would get somebody ideally to come in April, finish explaining, the resolution would come back, and you can decide in April to vote or not, right?
Cleaned up.
All
I
right?
think with a better understanding of potential
So-
consequences.
Now the way the Roberts rules work is you got to vote to table. So it's been first, it's been seconded. All in favor of tabling it to April with a controller review? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Opposed? We'll
Did
see
you
you.
actually already take a vote?
Yes.
We did, now she's changing it.
How can you do that?
Robert
Don't
would be
ask me.
displeased.
Yes,
Can you do that?
So
More clear.
I have to
the
check.
concern is about the pilot money, because
No.
I agree with you. I mean, I have no say in where my taxes go. I mean, I pay taxes, they go to
Yeah,
lots of things
it
that I
wasn't about-
don't want them to go to. But tell me about that other.
We're talking about the joint purpose fund and being at the table for how they decide to spend the bucket. Last time when the joint,
Not how they decide how to spend it,
Well,
how they create it.
Collect it.
no, the allocation of, how they collect, basically the joint purpose fund before was split up into 4 buckets. I want to have a seat at the table to decide what those 4 buckets are.
Maybe more to affordable housing and less to the city's
Yeah,
general
at this
fund.
point, they're basically saying, the 2010 amendment said that there was no end in it. They could be putting $1 in a year till they got to $861 million, or they could be putting in $861 million a year. But wait, before you answer your question, so basically, the buckets were, they decided, without anybody asking, 200 million was going to go to the general fund, 200 to the state, 200 to 400 to
All right,
affordable
We're
housing.
gonna stop
and
because
261
that's gonna
to the
go,
capital
it's gonna
fund.
go into April. So we're gonna come back, you have it in April. I'm checking on that and I'll let you know at the full board. I hear what you're asking, okay? Nick, I'd like Patrick to go before you for a safety and security report, simply because he always gets to go last. So Patrick.
You always put me last, that's not true.
You always make me go
Let
last.
Nick go, he's already there, come on, he's already there.
He's already there, he's got
Nick
his
is already
slide
there.
Patrick's still rehearsing.
Nick, go. Bring us.
I got questions.
I'm checking.
What the hell's happening? Slideshow.
Nick, I have your, it's a PDF.
So either way, this vote did not.
show up there.
She's gonna check.
There we go. Nice.
So in keeping with our kind of aspirational desire here to be increasingly green, I've made hard copies for members of the committee and our intern. Annoyingly, the bottom got cut off when I printed it up for some weird reason, but I put it up here on the screen. And as ever, this will be posted to our website tomorrow. I invariably find an error that drives me nuts and I want to fix, but these are all posted on the website as well. I will run through these briefly because I know we've been here for a bit. There are a couple of main things I wanted to hit on in terms of getting things on your radar. First things first, and Robert and Matt, this has been in the pages of the broadsheet. You'll see a blast email go out. But our next conversation on the Battery Park City Sustainability Plan, next Wednesday, a week from tonight, 6 River Terrace, March 11th. At 6:30. We have been working diligently with the community. We've done a couple of roundtables in January. Many of the people here have attended those, and thank you. There's an online survey as well that you can take. And the idea, for those who are unfamiliar, is that we are developing a sustainability plan to guide our planning and strategies for the next decade, with the idea of being as close as we can be a carbon neutral community, and also green guidelines that we pioneered in the early part of this century for both residential and commercial construction. We'll be releasing that plan in April for Earth Day, but what we wanted to do is make sure we do another roundtable on here. That's next Wednesday. I have here want to thank Bob Zach and Pat Smith and some of the folks for getting in touch with some of the condo owners as well to make sure that we are apprising them of the resources available as new local legislation comes down the pipe to make sure that buildings have to be made more green. There are resources we want to make sure they're availing themselves of. So next Wednesday night, take the survey, you can read more. Again, those are all hyperlinked and will be on our website. New York City Ferry, as we all know, is coming to an expansion, at least is coming to Brookfield Pier. We mentioned this last month. EDC presented at this very committee, although not in this place. That's tomorrow evening at 6 River Terrace, Thursday, March 5th, 6 p.m. This is a public hearing on their latest environmental review. They will be there tomorrow night, taking comments, making presentations. Public comment will also be accepted through 2 Mondays from now, March 16th, at that address. They will be working through that, firstly expanding through Staten Island, and then expanding thereafter to Battery Park City. You can read more about citywide ferry service at the bottom. Okay. Go ahead.
I cannot express, as important as it is, if you have any positive or negative feedback on an additional ferry service being put into that pier, this is your opportunity to express your environmental concerns. They have already come out acknowledging that there are problems associated with it. They have yet to come forward with solutions. So if you think that they need to do extensive air monitoring of existing before they add new, then you need to go and say that. If you think that they could add another 500 ferries to that location, feel free, go and say that. If you think it should be at other locations, but make sure you need to say something. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to Lucian for helping coordinate this in Manhattan. They're doing 4 hearings across the 5 boroughs. This is the one that's in Manhattan, and we coordinated here in Battery Park City. So thank you to Lucian.
BPCA for generously providing the location for
Of course.
this. So.
All right, next one. This is a perfect example of Community Board 1 BPCA partnership, specifically Tammy Meltzer. Okay. The West 10th Street Bridge is newly opened, as we know. There are 2 elevators. Lucian also assisted in this, as he is wont to do. We have received and now will be installing in those elevators kind of just directional signs, not direction in terms of latitude and longitude, directions in case of certain exigencies you might find yourself in. So an emergency, obviously call 911. For maintenance and cleanliness, you're going to call BPCA at that number. That's the number to our Allied Ambassador office, which is actually right there. They can help take a report and get it cleaned up to our parks operations. And then obviously if it's a mechanical issue, you press the call button in the elevator, and that will alert the elevator company to come and fix it. So those will be posted in the elevators, both at a level above the keypad, at an eye level in case you are wheelchair bound, and then we place both interior and exterior, which makes sense because if you're stuck in the elevator, you need to be able to see the sign. If the elevator doesn't open for you and you're stuck outside, you need to know where to call. So it's a small thing, but those signs are in, and they will be being posted as we speak. Okay. Rector Street Bridge demo, we touched on this last month. They actually finished very quickly over the course of the weekend. The ongoing work now that the spans are down continues to both expand the Liberty Community Garden and the basketball courts. That will be going through October of this year. More information at the page there. Yes, Jeff?
So I wasn't aware of any meetings about this. So what's going on? Like, my son was wondering if the field there is being shrunk. I thought the whole point of the bridge coming down is the field is getting larger.
Field is getting larger.
So then how are you expanding the garden, expanding the basketball courts, and the field's getting larger?
You're going to love this when I do it, but if I click, is this linked?
Should be. PDF.
Yes.
It's not just
Okay.
trying to connect.
In my handy dandy Battery Park City Committee report, we link out to the EDC's website on the Rector Street pedestrian bridge. Long story short, Jeff, is that when the ramp came down for the Rector Street Bridge, the space that ramp was on, now becomes, everything gets blown out that way.
So it's going that way.
So you have a wider basketball court?
Toward
No,
this,
it's not going toward the bike path or the pedestrian path, it goes out toward the building. So, and there's actually a schematic here at the bottom of this page. So it will show you that,
I get it.
yes, that the ramp gets blown out, and then as a result, you have
Okay, so
the courts and the garden
I get it. Just with this drawing, we've gone over this many times. I was part of the original redesign team of this park.
Yes.
Those courts should not be going the same direction.
Correct.
We've gone over this so many
That's not
times.
right.
No, they're supposed to be the same as they are now, which
Okay.
is opposite.
Yeah.
I told EDC this, they have to update the drawing, but yes, you actually passed a resolution on this.
Okay, and then also, see where it's green right there? If there's anything you or others can do about it, like sooner rather than later with warm weather coming.
Yes.
I get that we had to have a lot of the park closed off with that large fencing where they're taking down a heavy-duty industrial, ugly built bridge. But now that it's gone, they're going to be working more over here. The sooner we can get more of that park working for the kids, the better. The warm weather's coming, there's no need for that park. Right now, that field is half the size it used to be.
Cut off by a
So-
Right, they have it fenced off
If they
because of
can
site
get-
fencing.
Right, but if they can get that site fencing moved
to where they're
much
actually
toward
working.
the action, which is what we're looking at right now.
Yep.
That's where all the construction's happening. So the sooner we can get that fence moved and get that field open, that's one of the very few open areas for kids around here to play. And the downtown Little League is suffering with stuff happening at Pier 40 places to play, and like the overbooked nature of Battery Park City Fields. So anything you can do to help get that field as open as possible, that would be really.
I can speak to EDC and ask them to speak to Skanska and see what they can do about shrinking the footprint as much as possible.
You get what I'm asking, right?
I get
right
it.
now, the fencing is literally halfway up
Right.
that field this way, from this right-hand drawing.
I know, I see it out the window.
Halfway there. It's like right out the window here. So the sooner we can get more of that field in play, the better.
Understood. I will relay it.
put in two quotes to follow up.
Go ahead.
She hasn't got
Oh, hey.
The sidewalk,
That's not,
you could walk to the
that's not gonna happen, because that's where we're going. Nothing to do about that. That's where the construction. Well, that's where the construction is.
I have to check, I think it may be close to October, but they're gonna try and open it up. I can get you in touch with EDC to get the updates, but I think so. They make updates here on the site, and they actually have, here you go, project schedule. So they're gonna try and restore the stuff as they go, but I think the the range of dates, I think, may go through October based on the work they have to do. But to the extent that they can minimize or shrink the footprint, I'll ask them to continue doing so. And they've been back to this committee repeatedly, Stan, so maybe it makes sense for them to come in at some point in the interim between now and then. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, okay. Resiliency updates, we've done resiliency in a death lately, it's all good. We just had a North Battery Park City Resiliency Project last Thursday night. Thanks to those who attended. A presentation and video is on our site. Everything is linked there. Trevor and Tripp had a very good piece on it this morning. It's a picture from the meeting last week at the MCC. Thank you to Tammy and Justine and Wendy for being there. Alice was unable to be there, but had some information about kind of the information that was going to be produced and presented. So thanks again to the Community Board for their continued partnership. South Battery Park City. One of the things we talked about last week at the Environmental Protection Committee was doing a deployables workshop at a date to be determined in April. Once we have that book, we will let you know. But essentially what that will be kind of a sneak peek at some of the designs being explored for the deployables that will be installed as part of the South Battery Park City Resiliency Project, specifically across the northern edge of Peoria Plaza. And we will have that likely to the Environmental Protection Committee at a date that's amenable to the team there. We have the ball fields. Construction starting later this year at a date TBD, when we have more information there. We will be convening the team again to make sure we have the leadership on board and the community board as well to understand timelines and key dates throughout the construction process. West Battery Park City, as you know, will be going out soon with starting the design process on that shortly. We have our dedicated resiliency page, as always. Our Special Patrol Officer Program, thanks to Pat for this picture. Congratulations to Alexander Lopez, who's a long-time Allied University supervisor. He was recently deputized at the end of January. And that, for those who don't know, is an expansion of our Special Patrol Officer Program, whereby they can issue summonses to folks who are kind of flagrant violators of parks rules. Not that that's the goal, but in case that comes to pass, they have the ability to enforce our rules. Rockefeller Park Playground we've covered, set to reopen this spring. Burns of Battery Park City we've done. I think those are most of the new updates.
When? Are we talking April or June?
Probably May-ish sometime. When I have an exact date, I will. Hopefully not as late as June, likely not as early as April.
Can we get more of a closer target range, because the community, the families are going, the minute the weather turns warm, like
Exactly.
Jeff is saying.
I'm with you 100%. People are going to want to be outside.
Well, and we don't have an update on Pump House Park either. I don't see that. Did I miss that?
No,
Because that needs to be in your presentation. It is a public park, maybe managed by Brookfield,
Right.
but it is a public BPCA park, so we would like that to come into your presentation for updates as well.
I can get an update from Brookfield. I would not say it's BPCA Park. It's a park in Battery Park City. It's not a Battery Park City park, but yes.
It is a publicly...
Generally speaking, it is in Battery Park City and it's a park, so I will get an update from Brookfield and relay it to you.
Did you sell that park to Brookfield?
Did we sell the park to Brookfield?
It's yours. It's just like everything else is yours, but it's leased.
I don't know. I don't think so.
It's a park.
They're renting it.
They're renting it.
It is only maintained by Brookfield, so we would like the continuous updates to be in your report.
It's $9 million.
Either way, right. I can give you the updates, but they're not going to come from me. They're going to come from Brookfield. I just want to be clear about we're not managing the project. Right? I mean, to the extent that I could manage things, I report. To the extent that I don't manage them, I have to defer to the people who do. Okay, programming we know. Steam Dream, you've seen these in the page of the broadsheet as well. Family workshops. Our last Friday night films, Friday the 13th, as it turns out. Family workshop. And I think that is it for most of the highlights. Yes, our ball fields, actually, that's an important note. Summer hours are now here, spring summer hours. So whereas usually it's 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., it is now 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. daily. And the availability for those fields in terms of public access is also posted to our site for the next 4 months. So March, April, May, and June is all up there. I think that is it for the main points. Permanent walks and runs will start appearing next month because the main things we have coming up, as we know in the immediate future, is the 9/11 Memorial 5K walk run. And thanks to Tammy and the team, Sail GP will also be here next month to discuss their event in June. And with that, unless there's any other questions, I can segue to Pat, which is with his staff.
3 hands up.
Who wants to go first? Go ahead, Ann.
And
Can you give us an update next time as to what's happening with the park benches? If you remember when, Ruth Owen died and when, Tom died, we talked about putting a plaque on the benches and stuff like that. Could you give us an update as to where that stands now?
I can. Tammy and I will have to reconnect on that. We had the discussion.
That's what I mean for next time.
But yes, we'll reconnect and let you know where we are.
Okay.
Hello.
I'm sorry?
Hello.
Hi. Brookfield has been immobilizing bikes with those things that riot police use, plastic cuffs, and putting these documents on them that look like government summonses, although Brookfield, in spite of the fact that they would like to be a government agency or not. And these are on sidewalks adjacent to Brookfield. Can you order them to stop that? And related question is, when are you going to move the city bike thing that 2 years ago we said was going to move out from the Gateway to West Street onto Brookfield's beautiful model?
So, 2 questions. I'll take the first one first. These plastic blocks or whatever they are.
That you can
Where
use
are they happening? This is the first one.
South End Avenue, near Brookfield.
It's on city
So
streets?
if you chain your bike up to a lamppost out there, they come out and put those twist ties on so you cannot ride it or move it, and then hang a little card off of it that looks like a government-issued summons, warning you that if you don't get this bike out of here, we're going to take it and throw it in a landfill or something.
How are you supposed to get the bike out if they lock it up? You just cut it?
They don't. You've locked it to the lamppost.
Right.
They've immobilized it by putting those plastic things around it.
But you have to take
you
a care of
can't lock it. You can't ride it until you get like a pliers to cut
Oh,
it.
okay. I have no idea, but I'll
can
check
you
for
do
sure.
a favor, Matt, take a picture,
Yeah.
send it to Nick and I?
Send it to me. I'd like to find out.
Assuming everything I've said is true, can you order them to stop that?
I don't know. I don't know what the rules are on city streets as opposed to our parks.
But that's okay, they're not city cops.
But somebody should. I mean, if not us, it's probably DOT or I don't know. I don't know where it all nets out, but I'll find out. Is this just starting or is this
Yes,
been going on?
I'm aware of it in the last week or so. So if it's before that, I don't know.
Okay, this first one is right now.
Send me photos and I'd be happy to forward that to the head of Brookfield because they have no rights to police the street.
Yeah. Well, those stupid mall cop scooters they ride around in are technically illegal. You're not supposed to operate those in public, like in any public space. They're unregisterable, uninsurable, but whatever.
City bike station?
City bike station, yes, God.
I'm not sure that was agreed to, it was proposed.
It was it's forever.
It's 2 years plus that
When
the decision was made.
When we last spoke with Ed Pincott, not that I'm pointing it out, I love Ed.
When agreed, yeah, we said it was a done deal, I thought.
I don't recall it being done.
No, they found a location. It's just a matter of actually getting it moved. When we last spoke with Ed, I want to say the week before last on an unrelated topic, we asked him and he said, well, let me check again. So I will check back with Ed. It's not in our court anymore, but by next month, if it's not already moved, I will have a more fulsome update about why it hasn't been in plan. But when last we spoke, Ed Pinko said he was going to check. Ed is the Manhattan Borough Commissioner for New York City DOT. But yes, you're right. I want that moved.
Michelle?
Hey.
Yeah, hi. It's time for us to do that signage for the duck pond and to figure out what those protocols are going to be because they're going to be chicks soon.
Right, it's 2-week kind of hot spot in early mid-April. I know that it starts, right?
Well, I think that, if they come back, which probably they will, they'll start to lay their eggs and then they'll hatch by April 20th or something.
Right.
So we still have time. We should get the signs in anywhere they need it to be redone. And I'd like to just meet with you and whoever to just talk about what should be written on them or what else we can do and how we can prevent it.
Email me and we'll
We'll follow up. No, it's okay. We're all swamped, but you're right, at that time, I know it's usually that really a kind of an intense period for the first couple weeks in April, then it passes, but it doesn't mean that we don't want to address it. And now that we're ahead of it, we should make sure that we take the appropriate steps.
Yeah, because I don't want to have to head out there every day like I do.
No, I get it.
I want to try to get some sort of system going.
Justine?
One last thing.
Yes, ma'am.
Just to reiterate about opening up the sidewalk along where they're doing the Rector Street Bridge construction. I know Taylor said it already, but it is a pain in the neck for everybody who's walking there just to have to go through and outside. So if they can do anything, you can just make a walkway.
Okay,
Small space.
I don't know how
I
feasible
know.
it is, but I will relay it again to EDC and Skanska and
Thank
see
you. And also in what Jeff said about the
what they
parking.
can do, and as well as, again, as Jeff had mentioned, the kind of the shrinking of the footprint to the extent that we could within the bounds of, obviously, preserving public safety.
Thank you.
Anything else? Tammy, I know you have something.
Nope, I'm done.
Come on.
Patrick?
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Come on up, Patrick.
I'm up already.
Thank you, Nick.
Come and speak.
Thank you, Nick.
Look where I left you, it's right there, you don't have to go through it.
Okay.
We can read it. so.
Oh,
So we-
I'm so sorry, I did forget something. You're gonna love it, because it's a Pat thing. The elevator signs in the West 10th Street Bridge.
You already put the.
I know, but I was looking through my former emails, because you know me, I like to be one who follows up. Lucian had mentioned to me that going forward, what we'd like to do is also incorporate into past reports, not for tonight, but in the coming months, we'll incorporate the elevator outages as well, because I know the committee was interested in hearing about that. So far, so good, the others have been working great, but we can incorporate that into this report, so in the coming months, you'll see that as well. To go with the new signs. Thank you, Tammy.
You're very thorough, Nick.
The good news for Patrick, since we can all read, I think, who are here, you could just tell us why you think there's been increases and decreases year over year.
On the block rules,
There's no big shift here.
that's a tough one to
That's all.
figure out,
Yeah.
to be honest. But I think really just because of the month, this has been a long February, so there's more people out. So because of more people out and walking around in the park, we're going to have more people not wearing the rules. That's the only reason why I can see it. Same thing with the homeless. We're starting to see an increase in the homeless. I mean, February was only one, but we can start to see that increase. The dogs, it's nice to see that the reports are down, you know, but as the warm weather comes, it's still a challenge. I mean, we do have some clown that likes to jump the fence or Rockefeller with the dog, so we're
Actual
actively
clown?
looking for him. But
Sorry.
that's okay.
I like to
I
imagine
mean,
the actual clown.
when they see the lack of Alex was out today, and he saw Alex coming up, and he took off running.
Yeah, that's good.
You know, that's
It's a smart dog.
Yeah.
Patrick,
Yes.
what is our policy or our stance about homeless? And what are we supposed to do if we,
Well, during the daytime hours, and that's why we're in open park. So, I mean, if they're on the bench, sitting up is fine. If we don't, you know, if they're sleeping on the bench, laying down sleeping, we actually wake them up and say, listen, if you're going to sleep here, you got to do it sitting up on the bench. You can't take up the whole bench.
we have he's a very sweet guy, and my heart bleeds for him, but he lives on the sidewalk. Is there, I mean, how come not?
Are you talking about by Gateway, by Chase?
Not talking about on South End Avenue.
You can call,
He's
unfortunately.
a really nice guy. I don't want to get into trouble.
On South End by
You
by
report it to
Benvenuti.
311, and Homeless Services comes out and approaches him and asks him if he would like help. And that is the way there is, on the drop-down menu on 311, that is the best way to help. It's not illegal to be homeless in New York City, but if you call in repeatedly.
He sleeps there and stuff.
Yeah, he's right there by Benvenuti.
Yeah, he sleeps underneath the overhang.
To be honest, if somebody calls, let's say,
The young guy, right?
and they
The
show
young
up,
guy.
if he's not blocking the entrance to the store or the exit to a location. Right, and it's turn around and they ask him if he wants services and that stuff, and he uses services. There's nothing I can do. You know, other than, like I said, we can call 311,
Yes.
you know, and they'll come around and they'll walk from something if he's still here. Okay, a lot of times when we interact with them, after our conversation, they get up and they move on. In the past, when we had homeless on in Rockefeller Park, to be honest, around 12 noon, they were all gone because of some, I guess, supervision, some places not far, and they were over there officers to get lunch. It's a tough situation, you know, they can't build encampments, they're building encampments, you know, start putting up parks and all of that stuff, that's not allowed, so in that case, that means several agencies that get involved, the sanitation department, they come along and they take it off. Thankfully, we don't have that on this side, there's other places in the first precinct where they have the outside scaffolding, and they throw the cabins in the scaffolding, and thankfully we don't have that. Because that involves several agencies, they just come in just one day and take it.
So again, the highlight is if you see something, say something, load it into 311, have social services will come and offer him assistance. He is always able to decline it. Sometimes if people show up in 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times, maybe he will choose to, but other than that,
I have
there's...
no desire to harass the kid, he's a nice guy, but I just feel bad for him.
But maybe on a cold night, it's not a bad thing, because he could use to be in a safer spot.
If the temperature
Just call.
falls below 30 degrees, call 911, they come and
If I can add one thing as well, one thing that we've learned from the Department of Homeless Services is that it takes so many encounters with services before someone accepts them, is because every time they may not accept services, but they're known to the outreach coordinators and they learn like a little bit of something about the person, and then they can help develop a way to bridge that need. So there could be something that happened to them that was traumatic, or they need to be sensitive to that. That only emerges after many encounters. So it's actually it's a great thing for them to find that person over and over again, because they begin to build that bigger, better picture.
To call
Yeah.
311.
Yeah.
Yeah, not 911, but 311.
Yeah, 311. Yeah. Unless the person is injured or suffering, then call 911.
All right, anything else from anybody else? Then I'm going to say thank you to Patrick, thank you to Nick, thank you to everybody for staying. We are adjourned.
Can I see that for a second? You turn it off.